I thought I was just paying for a stranger's bus fare, but the moment she touched my hand, I was marked as the primary target for an internal audit that could end my life. Now, with illegal weaponry pointed at my back and a secret legacy coming to light, I've realized the woman didn't just thank me. She turned me into the final piece of an organized scheme that the shadows have been trying to erase for decades. The rain was lashing against the windows of the city bus like handfuls of gravel, and the air inside was thick with the scent of damp wool and exhaustion. I was staring blankly at the fogged-up glass, mentally tallying the remaining balance on my transit card, when I noticed her. She was huddled in the seat directly across from the fare machine, her coat looking like it had survived a war. Mismatched buttons, frayed cuffs, and a dull gray color that seemed to absorb the dim fluorescent light. She was frantically digging through a worn leather purse, her fingers trembling as she pulled out nothing but crumpled receipts and a single useless copper coin. The driver, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a sneer, was already sighing loudly, his hand hovering over the door-open button. "Last chance, lady. Get off or pay up," he barked, his voice cutting through the bus like a rusted blade. I saw her shoulders slump, a wave of defeat washing over her that was so palpable it actually made my chest ache. I didn't think. I just stood up. Before the driver could hit the lever, I swiped my own card against the reader, the green light blinking a cheerful, rhythmic beep that sounded absurdly bright against the gloomy atmosphere. "It's covered," I muttered, not meeting anyone's gaze, and headed toward the back. As I passed her, the old woman reached out. Her hand was startlingly cold, her skin like parchment paper, but her grip was surprisingly ironclad. She didn't let go as I tried to step past. She leaned in, her scent a strange mixture of mothballs and something sharp, like ozone before a thunderstorm. Her breath hit my ear, cold and steady, as she whispered, "The coins you just spent weren't for a ride. They were a deposit on your survival. They're coming for the debt, but they won't look for the one who gave it away." I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. I looked down at my palm, expecting to see a burn or a mark, but there was nothing. Just my own skin, pale and trembling. When I looked back up to ask her what on earth she was talking about, the seat was empty. The bus hit a massive pothole, throwing the passengers into a momentary sway. And in that split second of chaos, she had simply vanished, not stepped off, not moved to the back, just evaporated. I looked toward the driver, wanting to ask if he'd seen her get off, but his eyes were fixed on the road, his expression blank, almost robotic. I hurried to the back of the bus, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I decided to get off 2 stops early, needing the cold rain to clear my head. My apartment building felt like a sanctuary as I fumbled with my keys, but the moment I stepped inside the lobby, the atmosphere shifted. My mail was scattered across the floor, not just shoved out of the box, but shredded. I froze. My front door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peering out from my living room. I reached for my phone to call the police, but the screen was dead. I looked down at my hand again, the one she had touched, and realized with a jolt of pure, cold terror that there was a faint, shimmering smear of black ink on my skin. It wasn't ink. It was shifting, moving under my touch, forming a symbol I had only ever seen in the forbidden files of the service's archives, a mark that signified a target for a deep-cover internal audit. I wasn't just being robbed. Someone was inside waiting for me, and they were part of a massive, dangerous network that the service had been trying to dismantle for years. I realized then that the old woman hadn't thanked me. She had branded me. And as I stepped into the shadows of my own hallway, I heard the distinctive, heavy click of illegal weaponry being cocked in the darkness. The sound of the mechanism cycling was unmistakable, a metallic chink that echoed through the silence of my apartment like a gunshot. My instincts, honed by years of trying to stay invisible in a city that wanted to eat me alive, screamed at me to drop to the floor. I dove behind the frame of the coat closet just as a spray of splinters erupted from the drywall where my head had been a second before. They weren't just here to intimidate, they were here to finish it. "We know you saw the transfer," a voice rasped from the gloom. It wasn't the voice of a common thug. It was calm, clinical, and sounded like it belonged to someone who viewed human life as a mere variable in an equation. My heart was a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the transit card I'd used to pay for the woman's ride. It felt unnaturally hot, pulsating with a rhythmic vibration that traveled up my arm and settled into my marrow. I didn't understand it, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just a mugging gone wrong. The old woman hadn't just branded me. She had passed me a key to something much larger, something the group downstairs had been hunting for months. I crawled deeper into the dark, my breath ragged. I needed a distraction. I looked toward the kitchen where a heavy cast-iron skillet sat on the stove, left over from a half-cooked dinner I'd abandoned hours ago. I threw my sneaker toward the hallway. It skidded across the hardwood with a loud, hollow thud. The response was instantaneous. 2 rapid, muffled pops, the sound of a silencer turning a death sentence into a whisper. I didn't hesitate. I lunged, not toward the door, but toward the window. The drop was 2 stories, but adrenaline turned the risk into a blur. I hit the fire escape, the iron groaning under my weight, and didn't look back as I sprinted into the alleyway. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, washing the world in shades of charcoal and neon. I wasn't safe, but I was mobile. I ducked into the labyrinthine alleys of the downtown district, my mind racing. Why me? Why did the service's internal audit mark me as a threat? Was I a pawn in an organized scheme I hadn't even realized I was part of? I found myself at the edge of the subway tunnels, the only place where the service's surveillance grid had blind spots. I had to know what was on this card. As I stepped onto the rusted tracks, I felt a strange shift in the air. The temperature plummeted, and the graffiti on the walls began to glow with a faint, iridescent violet hue. It wasn't just paint, it was a complex series of ciphers. I took the card out, pressing it against the wall near a crude symbol. The concrete didn't just vibrate, it groaned open, revealing a hidden compartment that hadn't been touched in decades. Inside wasn't money or gold. It was a dossier bound in weathered leather, stamped with the seal of a department that officially didn't exist. My hands shook as I opened it. The first page was a photograph of a woman. Not the old woman from the bus, but a younger version of her standing next to my father, who'd been officially declared dead in a failed operation 20 years ago. Below the photo was a list of names, and at the very top, in bold red ink, was my own name next to the words, Asset 001, the final link to the archive. A shadow detached itself from the tunnel wall behind me. I spun around, clutching the dossier to my chest. A man in a tailored gray suit stood there, his face obscured by the flickering light of a dying overhead bulb. He didn't carry a weapon, but the way he moved, with the lethal grace of a predator, told me he didn't need one. "You were never supposed to find this," the man said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly cold. "But since you have, you should know that the woman on the bus was our best field operative. And the reason she marked you isn't because you saved her. It's because you were the only one who could open that door without setting off the detonation sequence." He gestured toward the open compartment in the wall. As I watched in horror, the edges of the paper in my hands began to smoke, and the walls of the tunnel started to hum with a high-pitched, mechanical whine. The floor beneath my feet shuddered, and a digital countdown projected itself onto the damp brick. 0059. He smiled, a jagged, broken expression. The internal audit has already begun, and you're the first target on the list. The countdown flickered in red light against the damp brick, a rhythmic pulse of doom counting down from 50 seconds. My heart was no longer racing. It had entered a state of crystalline, terrifying focus. The man in the gray suit didn't move, his eyes locked onto mine with a predatory amusement. He wanted to see me break, to watch as I realized my entire life had been a carefully curated illusion designed to house this one singular secret. 30 seconds, he remarked, checking his watch. The service isn't coming to rescue you. They're the ones who ordered the cleanup. You were just the container, the final link in an organized scheme to hide the truth about your father's research. It's a pity, really. You would have made a fine operative if you hadn't been so soft-hearted. I didn't listen to his taunts. My gaze dropped to the dossier in my hands, then to the glowing symbols on the wall. If I was the asset, as the text claimed, then perhaps I wasn't just a bystander. I looked at the transit card I'd used to trigger the mechanism. It wasn't just a card, it was an encrypted key card. I pressed the card against the central symbol on the wall, not with a prayer, but with a sudden, violent realization. I wasn't the target. I was the override. The humming in the walls spiked into a shriek, a sound of shearing metal and static. The digital countdown froze at 0007, and then, with a sound like a heavy door slamming shut in a vacuum, the numbers reversed. They didn't count up. They collapsed into a string of unrecognizable glyphs. The air in the tunnel turned static, charged, causing the hair on my arms to stand on end. The man in the gray suit staggered back, his composure shattering as the shadows in the tunnel began to twist and lengthen, converging on him. "What did you do?" he hissed, his hand finally reaching for the illegal weaponry hidden beneath his jacket. But before he could draw, the floor of the tunnel didn't just vibrate, it liquefied. A section of the wall slid aside, revealing not a tunnel but a high-tech observation room filled with monitors showing every corner of the city. My face was on every single screen, tagged with a status, asset authorized, audit terminated. The internal audit he had spoken of wasn't a search and destroy mission. It was a system-wide reset. By accessing the dossier, I had triggered a contingency protocol that my father had buried decades ago. The service that had been hunting me wasn't a law enforcement agency. It was a rogue shadow faction that had been operating in the dark, and they had just been locked out of their own infrastructure. The screens flickered and died, replaced by the blinking faces of investigators from the legitimate, high-level oversight board, the real authorities who'd been waiting for the link to be reestablished. The man in the suit turned to run, but the tunnel exit was gone, replaced by a sealed bulkhead. He was trapped in the very archive he had spent years trying to exploit. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a strange, cold emptiness. I looked down at my hand. The black mark, the brand the old woman had given me, was fading, leaving behind nothing but clean, unblemished skin. A moment later, a door at the far end of the observation room hissed open. A woman stepped out, looking younger than the one on the bus, yet carrying the same weight of tired, ancient wisdom in her eyes. It was the same operative. She wasn't an old woman. She had been wearing a disguise, a mask of fragility to hide a lifetime of tactical training. She looked at me, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "You saved me back there, kid. You bought me enough time to get the signal through to the real oversight board. They've been waiting for someone with your genetic signature to wake this place up." "Why me?" I asked, my voice steady for the first time. "Why not just tell me who I was?" "Because," she said, nodding toward the screens now streaming live evidence of the group's illegal activities and mass corruption. "The only way to prove you were worthy of the truth was to see if you'd risk your own safety for a stranger who had nothing to give you. You passed the test." I walked out of that tunnel and into the early morning light of the city. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in my life, the streets didn't feel like a hunting ground. The massive, dangerous network that had been clawing at my heels was dismantled in the span of an hour. The service, the real one, had arrived to sweep up the remnants. My life as a nobody was over. I had been a pawn, then a target, and now I was the one holding the board. I didn't look back at the subway entrance as I walked toward the surface. The debt was paid, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to understand that the woman on the bus hadn't just saved me. She had given me the power to change the world. The story of my life was finally mine to write.